The waves crashed against the shore, cold and merciless. Blood stained the sand. She shouldn't have survived. Her body, half human, half something else entirely, lay broken on the beach. Her shimmering silver eyes were dim, her breath barely a whisper against the salty wind. Nathan had seen death before, too much of it, but this wasn't just another casualty. This was something different. She wasn't from this world, and yet she was dying like any of them would. Then her hand twitched, a flicker of life. Nathan dropped to his knees. She looked at him, really looked at him, and in her gaze he saw something hauntingly human. Fear, pain, a silent plea. He could walk away, leave her to fate, or he could save her. But if he did, he would never be the same again, because whatever she wasn't meant to survive, and if he chose to help her, he'd be making an enemy of something far worse than death. So what would you do? Would you save her, or leave her to the ocean's mercy? Because once this choice is made, there's no turning back. The waves crashed violently against the shore, a relentless rhythm of nature's power. The sky was heavy with gray clouds rolling in like silent observers, watching the scene unfold below. A cold wind swept across the desolate coastline, stirring up grains of sand that clung to the boots of Nathan Carter, a field medic stationed on the edge of the human colony. His orders were clear: patrol the coastline, report any anomalies, and above all, stay away from the ocean. But something was wrong today. Nathan had seen his fair share of wounded soldiers, lost comrades, and the consequences of humanity's relentless march into the unknown. But what he saw before him now was nothing like anything he had encountered before. A streak of dark crimson painted the sand, leading towards the edge of the water. His training kicked in. Blood, fresh. Someone was hurt. He gripped his medical kit tighter, following the trail as it wove through the wet sand, leading him toward a figure half buried near the tide. And then he saw her, a girl, no, a creature unlike anything he had ever seen before, lay motionless at the water's edge. Her skin, pale and iridescent, shimmered faintly under the dim light, as if infused with the bioluminescence of the deep. Long, silver-white hair clung to her face and shoulders, soaked in seawater and streaked with blood. But it was her tail that made his breath hitch. Where her legs should have been, a sleek, scaled tail, black as the depths of space, lay sprawled across the sand, twitching weakly. Deep gashes ran along her side, and with every crashing wave, a new surge of blood seeped into the ocean. She was dying. Nathan knelt beside her, his gloved fingers reaching for her pulse. But before he could make contact, her eyes snapped open. They were a piercing shade of silver, reflecting the sky above like mirrors. For a moment, terror flickered in them, and she jerked back, her body reacting on instinct. "Hey, hey!" Nathan held up his hands, trying to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you." She blinked, struggling to focus, her breathing ragged and shallow. Nathan knew that look. It was the look of someone fighting to stay alive, but her body was failing her. Her tail twitched, but there was no strength left in it. Her arms trembled as she tried to push herself up, but the moment she put pressure on her wounds, she collapsed with a sharp gasp of pain. Nathan moved quickly, unfastening his medical kit. Whatever had done this to her, it hadn't finished the job, and if she didn't get help soon, the ocean would claim her. He grabbed a coagulant spray, preparing to stop the bleeding, but the second the mist touched her skin, she let out a high-pitched, keening sound, somewhere between a scream and a song. Nathan flinched. The sound wasn't just pained, it was otherworldly. He didn't know if it was a distress signal or an involuntary reaction, but it sent a shiver down his spine. "It's okay," he said, voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through him. "I'm trying to help." Her silver eyes flickered down to his hands, to the medical kit. She hesitated. Nathan took a slow breath, his heart pounding. He could leave her here, walk away, pretend he never saw anything. That's what the military would want him to do. But she wasn't a threat. She was just trying to survive, And he wasn't the kind of man who ignored someone in need. Decision made, Nathan reached out again. This time she didn't pull away. Instead, she watched him with cautious eyes as he began to patch her up. She was still bleeding, still afraid, but for the first time since he found her, she didn't look alone. Nathan worked fast. Years of field training had taught him that every second counted when dealing with an open wound. The ocean breeze carried the metallic scent of blood, mingling with the salty air, a stark reminder that time was not on their side. The alien girl flinched at his touch, her muscles tensing under his hands as he applied pressure to one of the deeper gashes along her side. Nathan murmured something, a reflexive reassurance, though he doubted she understood. "You're going to be okay," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was true. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. She was watching him carefully, as if torn between trusting him and bolting into the ocean. But she didn't move. Nathan didn't know what had done this to her. A predator? A weapon? Someone like him? Whatever the case, she had been running from something, and whatever it was, it might still be nearby. A temporary refuge. Once the bleeding had slowed, Nathan realized he had a problem. He couldn't leave her here, but taking her back to his outpost? That was dangerous. If the wrong people found out about her, she'd never make it out alive. She watched him as he weighed his options. Her silver eyes flickered with exhaustion as her body slumped slightly, her tail twitching weakly in the sand. Nathan made his decision. "Come on," he muttered, standing up and securing his med kit. Her eyes widened as he reached out. She recoiled slightly, unsure, afraid. Nathan hesitated, then carefully offered his hand again. This time she didn't pull away immediately. She studied him, as if searching for something in his expression. Something to convince her that he wasn't leading her to her death. After what felt like an eternity, she reached forward. Her fingers brushed against his palm, delicate and trembling. That was all the confirmation he needed. With a steady grip, Nathan hoisted her into his arms. She gasped, a sharp intake of breath, instinctively bracing for pain. Nathan could feel the weight of her exhaustion, the way her body struggled to stay upright. She had been fighting for so long. Now for the first time she was letting someone else help. Buena, a warning from the sea. Nathan carried her carefully, his boots sinking into the damp sand as he made his way towards a hidden supply shelter he had stashed near the cliffs. As they moved, the waves suddenly grew violent, crashing against the shore with unnatural force. Nathan frowned. The storm wasn't supposed to hit until tomorrow. Then a low echoing sound rose from the depths of the ocean, a sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Nathan glanced down at the girl in his arms. Her body tensed at the noise, her silver eyes suddenly sharp and alert. She knew what that was, and she was afraid. Nathan's grip tightened. Whatever had hunted her, whatever had driven her to this shore, bleeding and alone, it wasn't finished yet. Nathan moved faster. His grip on the alien girl tightened as he pushed through the shifting sand, heading toward the cliffs. The sound from the ocean still echoed behind him, a deep, reverberating hum that sent chills up his spine. She was tense in his arms, her silver eyes fixed on the dark waves. He could feel her trembling, though whether from pain or fear, he wasn't sure. "What is it?" he asked, glancing down at her. "What's out there?" She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't understand him. Or maybe she did and just didn't want to say it out loud. But her silence told him enough. Something was coming. Nathan reached the base of the cliffs and knelt, shifting the girl's weight carefully as he reached into the crevice where he had hidden a backup supply cache. He grabbed a thermal blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. She flinched at the sudden warmth, but didn't pull away. He reached for his comm device, intending to radio in a false report, something to keep the patrols away from this area. But before he could speak, the girl's hand shot out and gripped his wrist. Her fingers were ice cold. Her grip, despite her weakened state, was strong enough to make him pause. Her silver eyes locked onto his, wide with urgency. She shook her head. Nathan hesitated. "You don't want me to call for help?" She exhaled sharply, shaking her head again. Then with effort, she whispered something, a word in a language he didn't recognize. Nathan frowned. What does that mean? She struggled, as if searching for the right word in his language. Finally, she spoke, her voice hoarse. Danger. Nathan's blood ran cold. The humming from the ocean grew louder. The waves surged violently against the shore. Then, far in the distance, a dark shape broke through the water's surface. It was massive. Nathan's gut twisted. His instincts screamed at him to run. The girl squeezed his wrist again, her breathing ragged. They're coming! Nathan turned back toward the ocean. And then he saw them. Figures emerging from the waves, their silhouettes barely visible against the stormy horizon. Not human, not friendly. They weren't here to save her. They were here to take her back. Nathan clenched his jaw, positioning himself between her and whatever was coming. He had no idea what he was up against. But one thing was clear. They weren't going to get her without a fight. Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. The ocean had gone eerily silent, the deep humming replaced by an unsettling stillness. Then, movement. The figures emerging from the water weren't human. They moved too smoothly, too fluidly, as if the waves themselves were carrying them. Their bodies were sleek and black, reflecting the dim light like wet obsidian. Their eyes, if they had any, were hidden beneath smooth, featureless masks. Nathan tightened his grip on his sidearm. Behind him, the alien girl shuddered, curling in on herself, her breathing labored. She was too weak to fight, which meant it was up to him. One of the figures stepped forward, its elongated limbs moving with an unnatural grace. It stopped just a few yards away, tilting its head as if studying him. Then it spoke. The voice wasn't a voice at all, it was inside his head. Step aside, human. Nathan didn't move. She belongs to us. He glanced back at the girl. She was staring at the creatures, her silver eyes filled with something between fear and fury. No, Nathan said. The creature tilted its head again, as if considering. Then it lunged. Nathan barely had time to react. He threw himself backward, narrowly avoiding a clawed hand that sliced through the air where his throat had been a second ago. His training took over. He aimed and fired, 2 clean shots to the chest. The bullets hit. The thing barely flinched. Nathan's stomach dropped. It was fast. Too fast. He barely had time to duck before another strike came, this time from a second attacker. Claws grazed his shoulder, tearing through his jacket. He stumbled, rolling onto the sand as a third figure emerged from the water. He was outnumbered, and they weren't stopping. Nathan's mind raced. He needed a plan. Then a flash of silver. The alien girl, still weak, raised her hand toward the creatures, and suddenly they froze. Not in fear, in pain. A low, resonant sound filled the air, a vibration Nathan could feel in his bones. The creatures staggered back, their sleek forms convulsing as if something inside them was breaking apart. Nathan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the girl, hoisting her onto his back. Hold on! She didn't argue. With everything he had left, Nathan ran. Behind him, the creatures screamed. But they weren't the hunters anymore. Now they were the hunted. Nathan ran like hell. The alien girl clung to his back, her arms weak but holding on. Her body was ice cold, her breath shallow against his neck. She had used whatever energy she had left to stop those creatures. But for how long? Behind them, the shrieks of the hunters filled the air. Nathan didn't dare look back. He could hear them moving, fast. The sand beneath his boots slowed him down, but he pushed forward, his muscles burning with effort. He had to get her out of here. The cliffs weren't far. If he could reach the outpost, if he could get to the emergency beacon, maybe, just maybe, there was a chance. But then, a shadow moved ahead of him. Nathan skidded to a halt. One of the creatures had cut him off. It stood between him and the only way out. Nathan's chest heaved, his fingers clenched around his weapon. But deep down, he knew the truth. Bullets wouldn't stop them. The creature cocked its head, its body shifting as it prepared to strike. Nathan gritted his teeth. There was no way out. Then, the girl moved. She slid off his back, barely able to stand, her body trembling from exhaustion. But when she raised her hand toward the creature, Her silver eyes burned with something powerful. Nathan felt it before he saw it. The air rippled. A pulse of energy exploded from her, sending sand flying and knocking the creature back. Nathan's ears rang. He staggered but forced himself to stay on his feet. The creature writhed on the ground, its body convulsing. Then, with a horrible, distorted shriek, it turned to dust. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. The girl, whatever she was, wasn't helpless. She had just killed one of them, but she didn't look victorious. She looked heartbroken. Her knees buckled, and before she could collapse, Nathan caught her. The remaining creatures howled in fury. Nathan lifted her into his arms and ran. This time, he wasn't stopping. Whatever these things were, they weren't going to take her. Nathan didn't stop running. The girl's weight in his arms was light. Too light. She was fading. Whatever power she had used to kill that creature had drained what little strength she had left. Her silver eyes fluttered, struggling to stay open. Behind them, the creatures were closing in. Nathan could hear them moving unnaturally fast across the sand. Their inhuman shrieks echoed through the night. The outpost was just ahead. Nathan pushed forward, ignoring the pain in his legs, the burning in his chest. He could make it. But then, something slammed into him. The impact sent him sprawling. The girl tumbled from his arms, rolling across the sand. Nathan groaned, trying to push himself up, but a sharp, clawed foot pressed down on his chest, pinning him to the ground. One of the creatures loomed over him, its faceless head staring down. Nathan struggled, but it was too strong. The girl lay a few feet away, her body too weak to move, her fingers barely twitching in the sand. Nathan's heart pounded. He had to do something. The creature raised one long, razor-sharp claw. Nathan's mind raced. If he didn't act now, he was dead, and so was she. Then, a sound. A deep, unnatural vibration filled the air. The creature stiffened. Nathan turned his head. The girl was glowing. Faint at first, then brighter. A silver pulsating light. Nathan's breath caught. The sand around her began to rise, swirling as if caught in an invisible storm. The creatures hesitated. For the first time, they looked afraid. Then the girl opened her eyes. They weren't silver anymore. They were white-hot, burning with an unearthly glow. Nathan barely had time to process what was happening before. The air around them exploded. A shockwave tore through the beach, sending the creatures screaming into the night. Nathan shielded his eyes as the wind roared around him. When he looked again, the creatures were gone. The girl collapsed into the sand. Nathan crawled toward her, grabbing her shoulders. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. She had saved them both. But at what cost? Nathan swallowed hard. He had questions, so many questions. But first, he had to keep her alive. He lifted her again, this time without hesitation. The outpost was near. They weren't safe yet, but they had survived. For now. Nathan didn't stop until he reached the outpost. His boots pounded against the metal flooring as he burst through the entrance, carrying the unconscious alien girl in his arms. Alarms blared. The facility's security sensors immediately detected an unidentified presence. Nathan barely had time to process the flashing red lights before a robotic voice filled the air. Alert! Unauthorized life form detected. Initiating quarantine protocol. Damn it! Nathan ignored the automated warnings and kept moving. He had one priority, keeping her alive. The med bay was just ahead. He kicked the door open and rushed inside, placing her onto the nearest examination table. Medical scanners immediately activated, casting blue lights over her fragile form. She didn't move. Nathan clenched his fists, his breath uneven. Come on, he muttered under his breath. Stay with me. The screens above her flickered with data. Her vitals were weak, dangerously weak. Nathan gritted his teeth. He had brought her this far. He wasn't about to lose her now. Then she stirred. A soft gasp escaped her lips. Her eyes fluttered open. But something was different. Her silver irises now glowed faintly, as if still carrying remnants of the power she had unleashed. Nathan leaned closer. Hey, can you hear me? She blinked slowly, her gaze unfocused. Then her lips parted, and she spoke. not in a language he recognized, but in his. "You saved me." Nathan's breath hitched. She understood him. Her voice was soft, laced with exhaustion. But there was something else, a deep sorrow. He hesitated, searching her face. "What were those things? Why were they after you?" She swallowed, her gaze flickering with something haunted. "They are my kind," she whispered, "but they are not like me." Nathan frowned. She slowly lifted her hand, her fingers trembling, and placed it over her own heart. "I was created." Nathan's pulse spiked. "Created?" She struggled to continue. "They were supposed to protect me, but when they learned what I was..." Her voice broke. Nathan felt his stomach drop. "They tried to kill me." Silence filled the room. Nathan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't just some alien girl on the run. She was something more, something her own kind feared. Nathan met her gaze. "What are you?" She hesitated. Then she whispered the answer. Nathan's heart stopped. Nathan stared at her, his pulse pounding in his ears. "What did you say?" His voice was barely above a whisper. The alien girl, no, the experiment, took a shaky breath. Her silver eyes shimmered, reflecting the cold light of the medbay. "I was engineered," she murmured. "Not born, created in the depths of the ocean, designed to be something beyond my kind." Nathan's mind raced. A genetically modified alien? A prototype? She closed her eyes. "They called me a failure." Nathan clenched his fists. He had seen this before. Soldiers discarded, experiments erased, lives destroyed simply because they didn't fit the expectations of their creators. But she wasn't a weapon. She wasn't a mistake. She was alive. Nathan took a deep breath. "Then they won't have you," he said firmly, her eyes widened. "But you saw what I did, the power I have. I don't even know what I am. I don't..." Nathan grabbed her hand, warm, human in every way that mattered. "Listen to me," he said. "I don't care what they made you for. You saved my life, and that means I'm not letting you die here." Tears welled in her eyes. For a moment. Just a moment, she let herself believe him. But then, alarms blared. Nathan's stomach dropped. They had found her. The medbay screens flickered, security alerts flashing in red. Outside, shadows moved. Nathan turned to the girl. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly. "Then we run." Nathan grabbed a med kit, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and took her hand. She squeezed it back. Together, they bolted toward the exit. As the doors slid open, the creatures were waiting. Nathan raised his weapon. The girl raised her hand, and together they made their stand. The tide washed over the blood-stained shore, erasing the evidence of the battle. The sky stretched endlessly above them, stars flickering like whispers of fate. She was safe, for now. Nathan turned to look at her, sitting weakly on the sand, the faint glow of her silver eyes meeting his. She had survived. They both had. But what came next? Because this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, something was coming for her, for them. And when it did, there would be no more running. Nathan exhaled, gripping his weapon just a little tighter. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. But what about you? Would you have saved her, or would you have walked away? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more thrilling sci-fi stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because out there, beyond the stars, there are still so many stories left to tell. See you in the next one.